I'm Devin Levins again, here with CNU Tallahassee, represents CNU Florida. Our last official session, we have a happy hour this afternoon, but the last official session of the week. And we have our neighbors to the north of Tallahassee, Thomasville, an awesome place. If you don't find me in Tallahassee, you most likely will find me in Thomasville. Definitely when there's events going on, I have to wager, am I going to stay in Tallahassee or go to Thomasville for events? We have Haile with us, and Haile is with Fontaine Murray. She is owner of Fontaine Murray, correct, Haile?
Yep.
They're a creative agency. I'll let her explain way more about what she does because it's super cool. And then Kenny Thompson, who is the planner for Thomasville, and they've worked together on quite a few projects, and they're going to tell us a little bit about Thomasville, what they've done, and kind of just hear a different perspective from a rural community. We haven't had much of this yet. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, all right. So before we get started, can y'all see the screen? Are we good? All right. All right. Sounds good. Well, Devin, thank you. And again, yeah, I'm Kenny Thompson. I'm the city planner over at the city of Thomasville, and yeah, we're just really excited to be invited to be a part of this this conference, to be able to work with. You kind of showcase some of the things that we've been doing from a smaller community, especially from a smaller community in Georgia, invited to the Florida session. So just to give you a little bit of background on our community, Thomasville is originally got its kind of made its name by marketing itself as a winter retreat for northern kind of wealthy northerners in the late 1800s who were looking for a place to overwinter. As they were coming down on the trains, and over time has continued to innovate itself to keep itself relevant. Our community was one of the early pioneers of the Main Street movement back in the 1980s, when a lot of small towns were were moving out to the suburbs and they were tearing down their historic buildings. Thomasville was actually saving and restoring its historic buildings and starting a historic preservation program here. We've also been a very financially productive community. We've owned and outsourced our own utilities that we've made in-house and sold to some of the surrounding counties as well, keeping us in the black while a lot of other smaller communities are finding themselves strapped for resources. So really from a physical and from a fiscal standpoint, we've really done a very good job kind of preserving our community and preserving these bones. And this is great, right? I mean, this is a really good start. But what I would say is, so often as planners, we really tend to focus on just the physical side of things, and we don't really focus as much on how we can leverage the social capital of our community. It's really the nuances, kind of the nuances of the people and the nuances of the place that really make somewhere truly special. And that's really what we want to focus some of this talk on today. So at this point, I really want to turn it over to Haile, who can talk more about the creative district and how we use this process to build really more inclusive, inclusive designs and ultimately a more livable and lovable city. So, Haile?
All right. Thanks, Kenny. So this is a beautiful picture of the before of the sort of core of the area that I'm going to walk you through, which we call our creative district. So if you see that little red place marker, 209 West Remington Avenue, I'm sitting in that room right now. That's my studio. I have a brand design firm, and we specialize in place-based visual identities. So we do that for food companies. We also do that. We recently rebranded the state of Georgia Tourism Explore Georgia. And we've actually done work with Dover Coal. I think Jason's on the call today also. So identities for some of the plans that they've done based on place. And we do that right out of that building right there on the bottom corner where that little red marker is. What I want to tell you about this slide is that you can't tell from the slide, but this is sloped. So from the top right to the bottom left, there's a slope to this piece of land. And when it rained in downtown Thomasville, because downtown Thomasville is largely paved, this became a river. So where you see that sort of muddy car track area became a river when it rained. The street that you can see in the top left is West Jackson, which Kenny's going to talk about a little bit later on, but that's our historically African-American shopping district in Thomasville. So back when things were a bit more segregated, that's where most of the African-American businesses were located. When we started this project, this picture is from 2014. When we started this project, most of those buildings were empty or had, you'll see some pictures of some of the businesses that were in there. So what I would call this little square here is an urban planner's dream, because it's in the core of a really wonderful downtown, but it clearly could use some love. So the first plan, this plan came out in 2009. We're going to time hop backwards for a second. Thomasville hired its first city planner. We're a city of about 20,000 people, a county of 40,000 people. We hired our first city planner in the mid-early 2000s, somewhere in there. This was done in 2009, so he was working for the city at that point. This is what I call the parking plan. So all that gray stuff in the middle of the block, he drew parking, and I think the blue thing was a splash pad, which parking and a splash pad, fortunately, is not what we ended up with. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the next iteration of that plan, which was an amphitheater and a splash pad. The splash pad was hard to get rid of. And a splash pad up at the top. So one thing that I want to point out about this slide is that it really was intended to be the sort of trailhead of a community-wide trail that the city planner was planning for Thomasville. I want you to notice there's still a lot of parking involved in this plan. And then the other thing that I've got to tell you is that the city owned none of the property that was drawn on for this plan. And when this plan came out in 2014, I believe, we were like, well, this is a great start. We can't wait to have some input on it. And we were told, it's engineered. It's done. Nothing to see here. Maybe you could help us pick out some of the fixtures. And we said, oh really? Oh, just a minute. So we got together. On the next slide is a list of who was on, we called it the ad hoc committee because the city wouldn't let us, it had to be ad hoc because it was temporary, very temporary. This couldn't be a permanent thing. But at any rate, what we did was we gathered people together to push a little bit and say, we think this is a wonderful idea, but how can we make it even better? So on our ad hoc committee, were property owners, importantly, one property owner who was against the plan because she was mad because it gotten drawn on her land without talking to her really. Two local creative business owners. So one of those was me, and one was Scott Chastain, who happens to be a landscape architect. So that was helpful. And then our local arts nonprofit, our local preservation nonprofit, one city councilman, and then from city staff, we had the city planner, who at the time was Brian Herman, if he's on the call. Hi, Brian. I don't know if he is or not. And our engineer and our Main Street executive director. So if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is the process. This looks a little messy, and it was. But what happened was it got initiated in the city, and the city planner created that design that I showed you. And that led to really anxious citizens and nonprofits wondering what's going on. So we called the timeout. We actually developed this process that involved engagement and input loops. We knew that we needed to end up with a document, and we knew that it needed to go to planning and zoning for a vote, to be recommended to city council for a vote, to then go to final plans, then make sure the final plans, because sometimes these things go back inside the city and they come out the ringer different. So then we wanted to make sure that the citizen input was there again, and then finally to implementation. Now, this is a process that didn't exist in Thomasville. Projects like this tended to happen inside the city, and they didn't go for planning and zoning votes. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity for public input. So this project was a big change for Thomasville. So if we go to the next one, One of the things that we did first was we created a studio. So this was a small space on our main street that our Center for the Arts took the lead on. And if you look at the next slide, you can see a favorite, preference boards, up in that studio space. And this was open for about 2 months so that the public, people who aren't normally involved in planning, anyone who was wandering up and down our main street was able to come in, and you can see the little stickers on the preference boards, and it was very interactive space, which was pretty neat. It was also right next to our coffee shop, which doesn't hurt for traffic, right? So this was really about having that public input and getting people excited before we moved into the charrette phase, which I'll say that the word charrette was an unknown in Thomasville before we did this. And people suggested we call it something else, but we all love that word because it's so specific. And I also want to say that this was funded, $5,000 came from our arts organization, Thomasville Center for the Arts, and $5,000 from the city. So it was a nonprofit sort of public partnership. Obviously a $10,000 charrette is down and dirty. And the people who came to do it were wonderful friends of our landscape architect who was on our committee, and they basically did it for airplane tickets. So that I know is unusual, but that's how it happened, and that's how the funding went. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, this was one of my main roles in the project, was the branding for the charrette and for all the input sessions. I think this is important because it sort of added legitimacy and consistency to the whole project. And we use these symbols and these colors and these typefaces on all of our marketing materials, which you'll see one that was particularly effective on the next slide, which is the door hanger. The humble door hanger was a great way to be able to, not incur mailing costs, to get volunteers to be able to put these on businesses and local residences. And, we worked really hard to get everyone that was inside what we envisioned the district to come to this meeting so that they didn't feel left out or unheard. We worked, we had a couple months to promote it. So we did this, we did postcards, we did emails. Another good thing about having your nonprofits involved was that they have email lists of the people that are involved and care about that kind of work. So we were able to use their email list. This was, we did a little bit of social media, but not, Instagram wasn't a thing yet back then. And Facebook, I think we did a little bit on Facebook. Today it might look a little different, but most of this was word of mouth, postcards, door hangers, phone calls, and just also asking people to help. That got them even more involved in the process. Okay, so the next one takes us to the charrette day. So this was in spring of 2014. This was able to happen on location in that building where I showed you that I'm sitting. The Center for the Arts had rented it from us, and they gave the space to the cause of the charrette. So that was an important factor to be able to have it close by to the area that we were talking about. We did walking tours. We held small groups. That's one of the charrette leaders. This is the executive director of the preservation nonprofit in the camel colored coat on the right. We had a great turnout, considering that we'd never done anything like this in Thomasville. It was well attended. We did a lot of evening sessions. We had a great closeout ceremony. And then what we ended up with was a plan, which is essentially what was built, which is so wonderful. This plan went into this plan. So we ended up with an amphitheater, which is where we started. But you'll note the splash pad's gone and the parking is gone, which were two things we weren't sad to lose. The next slide is the actual plan. So this is the cover of the document. And I think it was really important to create a document because that's actually what went and I know most of these do come with documents. This was a great document, and it's actually what went to planning and zoning, and it went to city council, and they both voted on it and passed it. And I think Kenny can attest that this is not a plan that sits on a shelf. This is a plan that we're still using today to guide our decision making in this district. One of the things that I want to say was great was because there were so many people involved in this, when it came time for it to go to planning and zoning and city council, there were actually people in the room who were there to support it. So a lot of times people show up against things, but in this case, people were showing up for something, which was really powerful. So that document got approved, and then we moved on to our true engineering. Now, really, this is the engineering document. So this went back inside the city for engineering and drawing and bidding and figuring out all those things. They did hold stakeholder meetings to decide how big the stage was going to be, what it was going to look like, what lighting needs there were, what kind of trees we were going to have, the materials, even, you know, what are the benches and the light fixtures going to look like, and they're going to look different from Main Street. We ended up with places on the structures for public art, still not there yet. That's something we're working on, but it was embedded into the plan. So meanwhile, while the city is doing this kind of engineering working stuff, the Center for the Arts had the honor of chairing this event. It was called Due South. We held music festivals right on the site before the amphitheater was built to kind of prove it out. Like, it can happen, that parking's not a problem, that this is a good space to do it, that it all flows well, that people want this kind of event. These were really well attended. They actually were fundraisers that raised $70,000 for the Center for the Arts this year that we're looking at. So we were working really hard to prove the space. We also, the Center for the Arts did something they called Flaunt, which was some public art murals and also pop-up shops in some of the empty storefronts to show people that West Jackson was a viable extension to our already strong shopping district. So it's a kind of about, we went to work showing what's possible. Now that we had a plan, let's show that this really can come together. I have some fun before and afters next that I want to share. So this picture was actually a photo taken on our walking tour. We had the good sense to hire a photographer to document the weekend, which is why I have images to share with y'all today. This is a picture that was taken on our walking tour, and this was an old biscuit manufacturing building, and it had been a bar at some point, but obviously was in need of some TLC. And while the city was still planning the amphitheater, a private investor bought this building and did this with it. How about that? So now it's an awesome event space that is actually sort of borders a neighborhood. And one of the wonderful things about this is Thomasville is about 50%, maybe a little bit more African-American, and we had white event spaces and black event spaces. And this one, not like literally, but just it tended to be that way. This one is used by everyone in the community and beloved by everyone in the community, and it's a pretty awesome change for Thomasville. Okay, so I have another one from our walking tour. This is right on West Jackson, and this was Mickey T's consignment outlet. You know, maybe not quite exactly the kind of spot that you envision in an arts district. And eventually they moved out, and then the next slide shows what's there now. And it also, this little hint, little foreshadowing of what Kenny's going to talk about with our West Jackson Streetscape project that brought that street way further along than it was. So that's a nice after. And then we also have this one, which this is a little further up West Jackson, just another example of people investing in this area. That's the unvacant lot to the left, where you can see that long grass growing. That's what's behind. Yep, look, yep. And so this is the before, and then this is the after on the bagel shop, which is pretty sweet. And that's a sign that that my design firm painted. We designed that logo and painted that sign up there. So it's also been fun for us to be able to contribute in a creative way in the creative district. So I think that's it for my before. Well, no, I got one more before and after up my sleeve, don't I? So we're going to toggle back to this one. And then this is the overhead view of the amphitheater as it's built today. And I think Kenny has one more. So this is Due South, that music event that we started sort of in the gravel parking lot a few years later when the amphitheater is built. I want to share a few numbers with you. So the Creative District since 2004 has seen over $10 million in investment, about 5.5 of that being public and the rest being private investment, meaning people, buying up buildings and fixing things up. 30 new businesses have opened and 160 new jobs have come into the district since we started working on this. So I think it's been a pretty big success. One of the ways recently that I knew that this amphitheater was, we envisioned it as, we called it the urban parlor for Thomasville. So a place where everyone could gather. We didn't really have a space in our downtown that was like that. When we had recently had protest marches, a lot of them ended in the amphitheater, which I thought was a really powerful message that this is this space that people have made their own. And when a protest ends there, that is meaningful to me. That means that you built something that's beloved and people want to be in that space doing lots of things. So that's my bit on the Creative District. It was a long but awesome project, and we're all pretty proud of it. I'm going to hand it over to Kenny now.
All right, thanks, Haile. So the Creative District really, as a community, really whetted our appetite for charrettes. As Haile had mentioned, all of a sudden, the charrette went from being something that we were having to explain what that word meant to everyone was saying, hey, when are we going to do our next charrette? We've discovered a good thing. Let's keep it moving forward. And so this is just, would be remiss if I did not mention the Blueprint 2028, which is the comprehensive plan that we worked on with the help of Dover Cole and partners, and also Haile, who helped us not only as a planning and zoning commissioner, but also with the design of the logo and the branding for this. So just to go through a few images from the blueprint, kind of as our community began warming up to public involvement and to seeing the impact that they were able to have on these types of decisions, we started to see more and more people really getting interested in getting involved and seeing some of their ideas come to life. So as part of the blueprint, we did another charrette. We occupied a building downtown, actually in the bottom on West Jackson Street, and set up shop there as our temporary studio. And it was really an overwhelming success. I believe we've stopped counting at this point, but up until kind of throughout the week and even after the charrette, had over 1,000 people who came in and either attended some of the larger meetings or the little breakout sessions, which for a town of 18,000, to have over 1,000 people participate in the charrette was something that we were very impressed to see. And the people were very excited with the ideas and the visions that came out of that. And I truly believe that we have one of the best comprehensive plans that we're using on a daily basis to guide decisions and help to move the city forward. So as I mentioned, the city, we'd recently discovered this good thing with the process in creative placemaking, and really going from beginning with trusting the community to have that conversation about the vision, and doing that before we created the plan, so that when we finally went into the coding and implementing phase of this, we actually had community support. And at this point, I believe we've had at least 2 or 3 projects that we've taken through this that have received standing ovations from the public when they've been presented to our city council for funding. So that's something that was fairly new to me, but I think it's a good indicator that when the community supports a project and gets behind it, as Haile had mentioned, you have people showing up showing up saying good things about the city in a council meeting, which is not always the case. So I wanted to just kind of run through with you another project that we did as a kind of coming off of these threats and this community input and this new process with the West Jackson Streetscape. As Haile had mentioned, this was our historically African American and Jewish section of downtown, and really for the past 30, 40 years had seen very little investment either from the public side or from the private side. And so this next project with this emphasis on the street and coming out of the creative district was to see what we could do to revitalize the street. So one of the first things that we did going through was we began with some public meetings with capturing some feedback from the community and doing some surveys and some of these public information sessions. And what was really important about these was really not just to hear what people liked or what people wanted to see, but also to hear some of the things that people were concerned about and some of the things, some of the ideas that we really would need to address and make sure to flush out as we move forward. And so taking some of those ideas and concerns, we went out on a walking audit of the street. And what I would say was probably really telling about this walking audit was we were able to show some of these community members some of the concerns that they had about some of the design type initiatives and really test them out in real time to see whether their preconceived notions were correct or not. So this next slide really shows one of the big concerns from some members of the community was just we were proposing a mid-block crossing, narrowing the street to 20 feet, kind of pinching it down in one area to do a bulbed out mid-block crossing. And there were business owners and community members that were just terrified of the idea that no one in an F-150 could actually drive down a street that was 20 feet wide. That's
a rural problem.
So these are some of the, these are your small town problems. Is these we're dealing. We do a lot of 101 type of discussions with our public, and so what we did is instead of sitting there inside of a public meeting and trying to debate with them and tell them how wide a car really was and how these things work, we said, well, let's check it out. So we actually went out on the street. We put up sandwich boards, measured 20 feet between them, and then we all stood on the sidewalk for about 5 minutes. And one of the first things that happened was there was a trash truck coming one way, and like a big dually coming up the other way, and they passed each other going just fine. And I think that instant, some of the people who were concerned about that began reconsidering that, oh, maybe this maybe I don't have as valid of a point as I thought I did. And the other thing that we did, and this is I'll have to give I'll have to give the credit here to Rick Hall, who had participated in our comprehensive plan and gave us the idea of getting a radar gun to test speeds as cars were going down the street, because that was one of the other issues that we noticed was that by putting out these mid-block crossings, we were able to get vehicles. So even on a brick road, going up a hill in small town South Georgia, people want to drive fast. They will generally drive faster than is safe. And people were generally driving about 35 miles an hour on this road. That's a downtown commercial corridor. We found after we put these up and checked the speeds, people were driving about 15, 20 miles an hour, which was the exact same speed that they were driving up on Broad Street, which is just a block up, which is our main street area. So when people saw that we could make changes that could make West Jackson Street behave more like Broad Street, all of a sudden some of the merchants became very interested. And honestly, some of our most vocal critics became some of our most ardent supporters by going through this process. And this is just to show, this was after our discovery walk, we went into a design workshop And if we reversed those and done the design workshop before the discovery walk, I'm pretty sure that this idea of the mid-block crossing would have been killed before it had even really been able to to make it out of the gate. But what happened is, because we did it the other way, there was overwhelming support for actually narrowing the lanes and for increasing pedestrian walkability. Another aspect that came out of that was there was some concern by really some of the city staff and and just some other general community members that we were going to kill this street if we didn't add more parking. What they really needed was angled parking, and the more parking, the better. And that really that needed to be our primary focus. But when we actually went to the merchants and we asked them, we said, if we have enough space to add a center tree line median to really create kind of a gateway feature or angled parking, what would you prefer? And overwhelmingly, the public and the merchants chose the bottom option, to have the tree line median with the parallel parking. So having that kind of data helped us to kind of continue to steer this thing in not just assuming what we thought the public wanted, but actually by asking and educating and then documenting this, that helped to kind of keep this project on the right track moving forward. So after going through that, we took this through a public unveiling and through a public process where we took some of the ideas, took some of the final concepts, and rendered them up to show them to the community exactly what this street would look like, not from an engineering drawing, but really from a contextual standpoint. And we took these drawings and we took this project through our Planning and Zoning Commission to vote to approve, and then to our City Council to vote to approve as well. And by having that go through that public process, and Haile can attest to this, that the Planning and Zoning Commission made sure that any changes, any kind of material changes that happened during the value engineering things that happen on these types of projects had to come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for final review before moving forward. And I keep it on this slide because one of the big aspects of the streetscape was, because it was a narrow sidewalk, we were proposing to do a silvocell, kind of a tree root system underneath the sidewalk, which I can tell you, if it had not been kind of for the public input on this, that probably is one of the first aspects that would have been eliminated by kind of by budget conscious engineering to say, your trees are going to be fine. You don't need, they don't need the tree roots. It's not a big deal. But because we were able to get the public input and the public support for this, we actually were able to make it, these made it into the final drawings. And then this is an example of actually during construction. I think honestly we ended up going with Green Blue, which is a similar type product out of Canada. I think their rep was so surprised that we were actually installing this. He actually came down to view the installation and to oversee and to kind of show the community how not just how to install these, but also to monitor them, so that over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we will have some tangible proof to show how these tree root systems are helping our downtown trees to continue to grow either at a same rate or better than some of our trees that are planted in the open tree wells. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on from a community aspect had to do with the implementation. This is something that we don't often think about or really get a chance to be very involved in, but there was a consensus of the property owners on the street that really implementation was one of the major concerns. And so we went through some very, I would say very creative kind of implementation phasing of this, of doing it in stages where we always kept one side of the street open, and we maintained access to all businesses throughout the entire project, as well as creating pretty stiff penalties for the contractor if they did not meet the deadline. And so by putting kind of all of those in place, we were able to keep all the businesses open during the construction, and also our contractor finished on time and on budget, which at least around here until this point was pretty virtually unheard of. So that kind of helped by keeping the implementation side of this in check. It also helped to open us up to the more success we had with our projects, the more the community wants to see more of these. So by showing and going through the implementation well, and by as we've mentioned, actually getting a kind of community members to show up thanking the city council for going through this process has actually helped to encourage our community to continue moving forward with these kind of projects. And so I'll end. I just have a few different before and afters just to show this is the street as it was before, kind of a hodgepodge of concrete and brick and handicap ramps. This was the rendering that was shown to the public and the Planning Commission. This is the project under construction, and then this is what it looks like today. And then this is just another. This is the one of the main intersections where we were proposing a raised intersection here. One of the first, I guess, the first raised tabletop intersection in Thomasville, and because we were able to visualize it and get some support, it actually made it into the final project as well. And then I'll kind of just to end here to talk, kind of dovetail back into the collaboration with the community and with the different arts organizations. This is the mid-block crossing that I discussed, and on the other side of this is the unvacant lot. And the unvacant lot was, before it was unvacant, it was truly just a vacant lot, grown up with weeds and kind of a burned down shell of or frame of a building, and has now been through the Center for the Arts has actually been turned into a kind of an open art gallery. Has they have rotating exhibits. There's landscaping. There's lighting. It's really become one of the the gateways into the amphitheater. And so by continuing those types of collaborations, the Creative District and all the different projects are really starting to tie together. And I still think we're only about 80% done with the project overall, but we're continuing to move forward and continuing to show progress. And yeah, it's been a great collaborative effort for us in working with and listening to the community. And so with that, that's all that I have. And I guess we're happy to take any questions. Or I guess Devin, we'll turn it back over to you.
Kenny, that was awesome. Both you and Haile, this is such a cool way to see it. I go to Thomasville so often, and I know that's like my home away from home, I feel like, from Tallahassee. And you feel like you might know part of the story, but until you hear you guys really break it down, you really don't know the story of how hard it was to get to the point to see how cool it is now. There's already been a lot of discussion happening in the chat around the branding, and everyone really loved your branding, Haile. But yeah,
awesome.
Anybody that wants to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and ask them some questions.
Anything? Come on, guys.
I have a couple questions, but I usually like hearing what other people want to ask because they're more creative or like sets me in a new train of thought. But here's one, and this one's for Kenny. Was this the first time that you used a discovery walk with that group? And if not, what other types of visualizing things were you able to use that tool for to get community members on board?
Sure. So this was the first, and I know as Haile had mentioned, they'd been doing different types of walks, I guess, for the, when they did the Creative District, they walked around, kind of walked around the district. When we did the comprehensive plan, we did a lot of walks through the neighborhoods, having a lot of discussions. But this is probably one of the first, what I would say, kind of like a tailored type of walk where we had a specific route. We had about maybe 10 or 12 different items, whether it was shade, vehicle speed, safety, comfort, that we really wanted to highlight and zone in on. So that was the first time doing it kind of with this group, and it really seemed to go pretty well. It was pretty successful. And then we also used after that we did some voting exercises. We had some preference images. We were able to use SketchUp to do some mock-ups of different options on the street based on some of the criteria, based on some of the things that they'd seen while out on the walk, giving them a chance to say, now that we've experienced it, which of these different options do we think is the most appropriate? So we kind of used those two, the walks, and then kind of the design workshop and the voting exercises in conjunction with one another.
I think what I'll say is we have a really robust toolkit now, where we had none before we did the charrette for the creative district. It really all happened internally in the city, inside city walls, whether it was the planner or the engineer or whoever, Main Street. They would come up with something and just roll it out. And we just have all this. I just feel like, Kenny, when you say we have like this toolkit, and sometimes we pull out a walk, and sometimes we pull out a charrette, and sometimes we pull out a workshop, and sometimes we pull out preference boards, and it's been so expanding to learn just all these different things that we can do to get input.
So no, I agree, and I'd actually have to say from when I came onto the city, you have to give a shout out to Brian, because I see him sitting there, but he really
hi Brian.
But Brian Herman, as the city planner at that time, really he was really pushing and advocating for expanding the city's toolkit, and really for expanding the kind of the design ability that the city had to be able to really think about things from a design perspective, and not just a policy perspective. And I think that's having that was something that was able to, for the city to have something that the community could relate to, really kind of helped to further on some of those discussions and those meetings too.
So, but we had a time there where we didn't have a planner, and we just had a city engineer. Just don't tell them I said that. We had a city engineer, and I remember distinctly we were working on the creative district, and he said to me, "I'm about to hire a new planner, and you're going to love him," because he sort of didn't know what to do with us. And that's when Brian came on and did know what to do with us. So that was Brian was a great addition right when this was. I mean, Brian, you came right when the creative district, that ad hoc committee was forming, and his timing was perfect, is what I would say.
Well, thank you, Haile. That's very kind. Yeah, it was right. It was perfect timing. So I was very fortunate.
Yeah. It looks like someone had a question about the community walks. Did city staff conduct those, or the help of a consultant? So I think we've done it both ways. That one, West Jackson, was really city staff. I think the walks we did during the creative district were the folks leading the charrette, but also Brian led those walks, I think. And then I think when we were doing the comp planning, Dover Cole with city staff led the walks. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I just saw it over in the chat, so I thought I'd answer it.
I want to throw one.
Also, like, I just want to do charrettes for the rest of my life. They're so energizing and fun, and that I actually went and got myself all trained up in charrettes. I know, whatever, but it's just such a cool way to make quick, great decisions. I actually use it in my brand design firm now when we work with clients. We have 2-day brand sprints, and I use a lot of stuff that I've learned during planning charrettes to build consensus quickly and move on. So that part's been awesome.
Hell, I got one for the both of you, but I want to come to you first, I think, on this. I've worked with tons of communities, and I push so hard to them that if they can find the creatives or the artists within their community, the resources that they bring to the table, because they're used to finding ways of doing with less than most people and making something really cool out of it. how do you think that really supports like the planning departments? If the planning departments could hire creatives to be on their team, do you think that's beneficial?
Well, yeah, I mean, Kenny brought drawing skills to the planning department that weren't there before, and it just helps people visualize. But like on that original charrette ad hoc committee, we had a landscape architect and we had me, you know, graphic designers at the core of what I do. And I think, you know, we didn't have a big budget. So things like, let's do a door hanger, you know, it is about doing sort of more with less and being scrappy about it and figuring out how to get it done. I think we're pretty willing to give our time when it's something we're passionate about. I know I've done a ton of graphic design projects over the years for the city planning department, totally pro bono, right, Brian? And, but you know, it's what I'm passionate about. When someone asks me to work on something that I really care about and they ask me to do it for free, I'm more likely to say yes than to, you know, to something that I'm not into or not that into. So, and I'm not suggesting that everyone always asks creatives to do things for free, because that gets annoying too, right? So choose wisely when you're going to ask your creatives to do things for free. But, you know, we will do we all do some pro bono work. I mean, all the creatives I know do save a little piece of themselves for that. But I think it's important. And, you know, and in materials like sidewalk chalk, right? There are things that you can do that are so creative and they attract so much more attention than an ad in the paper or whatever.
I think you guys as a team did a really good job telling the story for this, like of where Thomasville has come from. And that's something I feel like is really important, is having a good storyteller. Is that something you guys talk about in Thomasville, of how you tell your story from the planning perspective and kind of sharing that over to the citizens, or like combining the creative and the planner together to get a story?
I mean, yeah, and I guess I would say, and Haile, you can you step in, but I mean, it's, you know, I don't know if we've kind of formalized a storytelling process, but I think that what we will say is that we, certainly, as we're going through these projects, making sure that that we understand, or that the community understands the reason for why we're doing what we're doing, or what the history is. I consider myself more of a visual storyteller than an oral storyteller. I think that's more of, you know, my talents are more, being able to help people visualize things, than really being able to talk about them. But I think that having an image is a very powerful tool, both for the community to be able to buy in and recognize and to comment on, but also when you get into get into the battles with whether it's your fire marshals or your city engineers or other people, that you actually can, and they tell you, well, this just won't work. Like physically it won't work. And then you draw it out for them and you say, well, can you explain, then how do you explain the fact that it works? And then they don't have as much to stand behind. So I would say that having that story, and having the community buy into what you're doing has been incredibly important.
So I would say also that you have to keep in mind that some people are auditory and some people are visual, and you really need to be able to do it both ways to get everybody sort of in tune with where you're headed. Sometimes it's about taking those words and turning them into visuals. So there's like, you got to close that gap, because you can say this is a bulb out and people are like, what is a bulb out? And then you draw it and then they understand what on earth, especially with planners, y'all have a lot of terms that are bizarre and mean something to you, but don't mean something to the regular old people. I consider myself, my title is armchair planner. So I have learned a lot of this over the years in working on it, alongside these guys, Kenny and Brian, and even the engineers. But that they go hand in hand in the storytelling, the words and the visuals.
We still have quite a few people on. I'm sure there's got to be other questions.
Who's been to Thomasville?
I've been to Thomasville. Your projects are great. Yeah, kudos. Don't have any questions. Just wanted to say that you made some very effective and memorable spaces, and really appreciate going up there. And whenever we're heading north, we drive through town instead of around on the truck route. So.
Oh, I mean, how awesome is that? I mean, is that a testimony right there? We drive through town instead of around on the truck route. How many small southern towns do you do that in? Like none. Yeah. So that's awesome. So when I moved here in 2003, I did not grow up here. You can get a latte, like not a coffee shop to be found. So our main street always had that good bones. We are blessed in a way that it's small, right? So it's like 4 blocks that we had to revitalize. So when you do one thing, it made you could do 1 block and the next block, and you have a really awesome downtown at that point. We still have work to do in our downtown. Jason asked what we're looking forward to working on next. And I definitely think our neighborhoods, we've done a lot of great work in our core and in our downtown, which benefits everyone. Our comp plan had a lot in it about neighborhoods and thinking we have a lot of dilapidated housing. We have a really high rental number, and we have a lot of empty land in great neighborhoods, you know, where the roads are already built and the sewer's already there and the electric's already there. And we need to focus on our neighborhoods and particularly the sort of nodes in our neighborhoods where there used to be commercial and there isn't anymore. I'd love to see us focus on that as part. And then of course, continuing to work on the creative district plan, which as Kenny said, we're only 80%. I mean, that's a little random of a number, but yeah. I don't want to stop working on downtown, but our neighborhoods need some of our focus, I think.
Ask your question, Paul.
How is downtown adapting to the COVID situation? I've been really interested in how businesses have done some creative things. Is there anything like uniquely rural community that you've seen happen in downtown Thomasville?
I was wondering the same thing as well.
Well, I would say, what would I say? I mean, they did sort of typical things like curbside pickup areas, but that happened, you know, on March 16th. Like our main street had sidewalk signs up blocking spaces for people to be able to pick up, you know, for shops and restaurants to be able to deliver to your car really quickly. So our main street's been really responsive. Our city's just committed to putting 24 tables and chairs throughout our downtown so that people can get food to go. And that's a really, you know, in the big scheme of things, not an expensive deal. They've been, I want to say, lax, don't tell the city manager I said this, about alcohol laws on sidewalks so that you can enjoy a beverage on the sidewalk, which I don't think you're actually supposed to, but this is recorded, right? Oh. Yeah. But you know, just a general sense of accommodation. If the merchants ask for it, the city's really been trying to figure out how to make it happen. I also will say that Thomasville is a fairly conservative place and people are sort of less afraid here. You know, I don't really want to get into the whole political aspect of COVID and wearing a mask or not. That this isn't really the place, but our downtown is sort of puffing back up, for lack of a better way to describe it.
See, and I'll actually say I went kind of in the height of the pandemic. I was downtown, and it was probably, I think it was a Thursday afternoon. I think it was one of the busiest Thursday afternoons I'd ever seen because all your restaurants had they'd put their tables kind of barricading their front doors, and they were serving to-go food and they're serving drinks, and the sidewalks had become the new dining spaces. And I was just out for a walk, and normally I wouldn't stop in Liam's and grab a cocktail, but it was right there. And so it turned into a little mini outing. And there were people out walking and riding their bikes, and because we had kind of because our outside, over the past 15, 20 years, we've been working to get the outside spaces to feel more like rooms. people were a lot more comfortable just out there, on the sidewalks, walking around on Broad Street and on Jackson. So it was, that part of it was really interesting. And honestly, you go downtown now, and it seems pretty much it's back to I'd say it's almost back to normal. I don't think, as far as a permanent closure, I don't think there's been any business downtown that we've actually had that is closed down due to the pandemic. So we've been really thankful for that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, our Applebee's and our Ruby Tuesdays closed. Boo hoo! Don't miss them. So, I think our community really supports our downtown, and I think we've seen that sort of double down throughout all of this. I'm not saying that that they're not continuing to have a hard time, and that our merchants have had a great year, but I think they're all hanging in there, which is great.
Looks like you had another question come in through the chat.
About losing 15 to 35-year-olds. So one thing I would say about that is that we have a pretty robust educational system here in Thomasville. We have a county school, a city school, and a private school. So I think those young parents are leaving the city, and they can find a place for their children to go to school here, any one of those systems. So that's a big part of it. We also have a hospital in Thomasville that serves a 4-county region and is one of our largest employers, so that you have good medical in Thomasville, which is maybe more appealing to older people, but it certainly was part of the reason that we came back. We are definitely, my husband's a real estate broker in Thomasville, and he's definitely seeing people leaving Atlanta and Nashville and New York and moving to Thomasville. Our housing stock is getting a little tight at the moment, which I guess is good. I think also that we've all learned that we can do our job from anywhere. So that's going to be good for Thomasville, but it may also, with telemedicine, are we going to have less doctors living in Thomasville? With education, probably having some online element from here on out. What does that look like for Thomasville? So I think there are a lot of long-term effects from COVID, but I don't know what they are yet. But we do. I wish I had my Dover Coal book in front of me, because I could tell you what our population graph looks like. But people, anecdotally, people are staying or moving back to Thomasville.
So yeah, I mean, and I'd say, because I think our overall growth rate's fairly constant. I think we're at like 2%, so almost very slow from growth. But what I would say, and you kind of, for me, anecdotally, is you see a lot of people who maybe you lose maybe the 18 to 25, 22, 23-year-olds who they're going off to college, or they want to move to the city, or they're kind of leaving town. But as someone who was until recently kind of in that age bracket, I actually, one of the things that drew us to Thomasville was just the quality of life. I mean, I think it's something that a lot of people in larger cities are starting to feel. If you to afford a house in a walkable neighborhood that has a coffee shop and a pub and a good place to eat, you're talking about paying a kind of mortgage or living in a size house that makes it really difficult to actually be able to afford to do all those other things that you enjoy. And Thomasville, these smaller towns, they have especially a town like Thomasville that has great restaurants, great coffee shops, really a well-functioning downtown that's surrounded by a well-preserved historic housing stock that's pretty affordable. I mean, that was for us moving from the kind of the large sprawling metropolis of Atlanta. Thomasville felt like just like a little lost gem.
I think we have over 100 active nonprofits in Thomasville. So that's another thing that's really unique. Our art center, we've talked about the Center for the Arts throughout this whole presentation. I think their annual budget is close to $2 million. So we have some really robust nonprofit stuff happening here too, which I think helps with all of that quality of life business.
Well, we are at 5:35, and we appreciate you guys coming on. We got the happy hour coming up, starting at 5. Is it 5:45 already? Yeah, 5:45.
Yeah, it's 5:45.
But I appreciate both Kenny and Haile being here talking about Thomasville, and I can't wait to get back up to Thomasville. I know COVID's kept me away a little bit, but I'm excited to come back and hang out, talk to you guys, and do some projects.
Let's do it.
We're looking forward to it.
And before we end this session, I do want to kind of give kudos to Daniel Marsh, who asked that last question. He's actually a student, I believe, at the University of Western Australia, who has joined us. And so you can say that your presentation has reached an international audience now.
I love it. We can go to Australia on Zoom because we can't on an airplane right now. That's awesome.
You could also say he won the social distancing award.
For sure.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good one.